Hyvää huomenta, hyvä yleisö. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to speak in English so that everyone is included. My name is Anna Möttölä. I'm the head of Helsinki International Film Festival and the Season Film Festival. And on behalf of the festivals, you're very welcome to this seminar of plotting violence. This is our, I think, fourth or fifth seminar together with with VIFT, and thank you again to VIFT Finland and to all our partners for organizing this seminar, and welcome to all our speakers who are already here and those who are yet to arrive. This feels and is a very interesting and important time in film culture and in the film industry internationally and in Finland. And even though this is not a new subject at all, it really feels that something has now shifted in the last, let's say, 6 months, 8 months. And we are really now talking and confronting these issues and the violence against women in film and in the film industry, and also the imbalance and inequality towards minorities and the problems we have in representation, not only of women, but of ethnic minorities and sexual minorities, and also, if we go further, of men. I don't think that all the men like how they are represented in film. So it's really, really heartening to now be a part of this discussion and see it going on and made long go on. It has been so important to hear all these testimonies that have been coming out since last September, last October. But also what we are really happy about is that now with this seminar, for example, we are also looking at the root causes and the things behind these experiences of violence that have happened and keep happening, unfortunately. And that, I think, is the way that to go forward and to actually try and solve these problems, is to try and to go deep into ourselves and to the films we are watching and making, to think about the culture and thoughts and philosophies and problems embedded in our film culture. One topic is the violence against women portrayed on screen. So that's all from me for today. Pauliina is going to talk a bit about how the day is going to progress. But thank you all for coming, and also do enjoy the festival. Pauliina, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Minun nimeni on Pauliina Punkki ja mä edustan Women in Film and Television Finlandia, joka on tämän tapahtuman järjestäjä myöskin. Tervetuloa myös meidän puolesta. Ja mä tahdon kiittää Season Film Festivaalia. Meillä on nyt jo tosiaankin 5. kertaa mahdollisuus käsitellä yhteiskunnallisesti tärkeitä aiheita yhdessä With Nordicin kanssa. Me valitsimme tämän päivän aiheen ennen Me Too ja kulissien takana ilmiöitä. Se ei tarkoita, että olisimme Nostradamuksia, vaan enemmän ehkä sitä, että näitä aiheita riittää keskusteltavaksi. Tällä kertaa tämä aihevalintamme on poikkeuksellisen vaikea, mutta muutosta ei tule tapahtumaan ennen kuin näemme ja kohtaamme, ei vain elokuva- ja televisioalalla, vaan yhteiskunnassamme olevat ongelmat ja ryhdymme toimeen. Mä tahdon kiittää tämän tapahtuman yhteistyökumppaneita, joita ovat Finnkino, Suomen näytelmäkirjailijat ja käsikirjoittajat Sunklo ry, Suomen elokuvaohjaajaliitto Selo ry, Suomen elokuva- ja mediatyöntekijät Z ry sekä meidän tapahtuman rahoittajat Svenska Kulturfonden, Stiftelsen Tres Meder sekä Pohjoismainen kulttuuripiste. Tämä meidän tilaisuus tänään on 2-osainen. Ja ensimmäinen näistä keskittyy naisiin kohdistuvan väkivaltaan yhteiskunnassa. Ja tästä aiheesta meille tulee keskustelemaan nyt aamupäivällä meidän loistavat panelistit, tanskalainen ohjaaja Christina Rosendahl, jonka elokuvan Violently in Love voitte nähdä osana Season Film Festivaalia muun muassa tänään kello 16.45, jonka jälkeen hänen on pieni Q&A, jossa voi esittää myös kysymyksiä sitten elokuvan jälkeen. Ja toinen meidän panelistimme on Amnesty Internationalin Suomen osaston sukupuoleen ja seksuaalisuuteen perustuvan syrjinnän asiantuntija Pia Puu Oksanen. Ja nämä molemmat tilaisuudet vetää sukupuolen tutkimuksen maisteri ja esittävän taiteen ammattilainen Olga Palo. My name is Paula Punkki and I'm the organizer of this panel, Plotting Violence on behalf of women in film and television Finland. Welcome. For the 5th year in a row, Season Film Festival has created an opportunity for us together with Nordic to host a topical panel on the most discussed phenomenon in the Finnish society and culture. I want to thank our sponsors, Finnkino, Selo, Association of Finnish Film Directors, Finnish Playwrights and Screenwriters Guild, the Union of Film and Media Employees in Finland. This panel is financed by Swedish Cultural Foundation in Finland, Stiftelsen Tresmeder and Nordic Culture Point. Our first discussion will focus on gender violence in society. And we are very happy to have excellent panelists discussing this topic together with our moderator, Olga Palo. First panelists are and before that, I'd just say that we will have a break at from 12 to 1, and after that we will change our panelists and our topic. So please come back at 1 then after this panel is ended. So yes, the second panelist we have is from Amnesty International, Pia Puu Oksanen. And did I introduce you, Christina? No, sorry, in English. So first, we have a Danish film director, Christina Rosendahl, whose film Violently in Love you can see today in Maxim at 4:45. And after the film, you can also have questions to Christina in the Q&A session. So welcome both, and this panel is hosted by Olga Palo. But first I'll just introduce, please come here. Here's and Christina. And I'll just give the mic to Pia Puu Oksanen, Amnesty International, on advisor on gender and sexuality-based discrimination.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here. This is an important discussion. I can't see anybody, so I'm kind of trying to have a contact with you at the same time as I'm speaking. I'm just going to say very briefly something about the issue today. And right in the beginning, I want to clarify one definition. When we're talking about violence against women, many people claim that, but why don't you speak about family violence or intimate partner violence? Well, we are using the definition of violence against women because that's an umbrella for all kinds of forms of violence, where the only common thing among the victims is that they are typically women. They are feminine. They have different backgrounds. They are homeless. They are academics. They are drug users. They are whatever. They are bosses in different kinds of organizations. They are from the top to the bottom, and the only thing that they have in common many times is that they have experienced violence. And the umbrella it's a definition, it's a human rights definition based on the human rights instruments that have identified violence against women as a form of discrimination against women. And under that umbrella, we are talking about intimate partner violence, we are talking about female genital mutilation, we are talking about sexual harassment and sexual violence, we are talking about forced marriages, we are talking about all these different kinds of forms of violence. So that's the reason why we are not talking about family violence or intimate partner violence, because it's part of that big umbrella which is called violence against women. And now when we have that clarified, I want to tell you a little bit about how I came into an understanding about some other similarities that these different kinds of violences against women have. I was asked to write an article approximately 10 years ago to a great book, anthology, called, in English it's the translation might be like My Pussy is Wild and Free, Pimppini on valloillaan. So I was asked to, Katja Kettu, one of the editors, asked me to write an article, and she said, like, you know, you could compare, for example, intimate partner violence and trafficking of women, because they are so different. Like, you know, it's a good subject, so please write about that. And I was like, okay, yes, I can do that. Because at that time I already worked for Amnesty International, what my approach was, like, of course I want to see the structures, and I introduced myself to 800 court decisions where the topic was intimate partner violence, and also I introduced myself to many cases of trafficking of women. And I started to explore how the court has seen these two very different kind of violences against women. Well, it was not really a surprise, but because I already knew that, but it was still a revelation to me to understand that even though these two forms of violences are very often seen as very different. Like, we are talking about different worlds, trafficking of women, really, especially when it's linked to sexual abuse. Has nothing to do with intimate partner violence. It does. To my surprise, the dynamics were symmetrical. First, when the victims in court, when they explained, when they testified what kind of violence they've had experienced, the story went on in a very, very similar way. First, there is pressure, psychological violence that intensifies as time goes by. First, there is maybe admiration, which is then going to change into gaslighting. And that gaslighting, what I'm referring to is like you are made to believe that you are mentally unstable, you are hysterical, you are overstating, you are exaggerating, all these things, and that you are definitely the one who's mentally unstable in this situation. So these were the similarities. But also, like, when I looked at these hundreds of cases, it was also very obvious that the other thing that was similar to victims of intimate partner violence and trafficking of women was that the consequences of that violence, whether it was psychological violence that permeated the whole process, or whether it was physical violence or sexual violence, it accompanied like that social isolation that came with the violence. And with that social isolation, I mean not only that the people were not permitted, or these victims were not permitted to meet other people, but it was also like mental isolation, that they felt that there is nothing that they can do, that there is nobody who can really understand and help them. And what is really striking me now when I'm talking to you about this is like that when we are talking about sexual harassment in the society, at the workplace, in film industry, everywhere, we see the similar things. We see the questioning of methods. Like, you know, for example, when I was looking at the court decisions, it was clear that many of the perpetrators, they justified their means because they said, like, you know, but this was the deal that we had. We had this relationship. We had this person agreed to be prostituted, and this person agreed to be with me. And she never left. There were no locks in the doors. She never left. So that was like a sign to the perpetrator that this is okay, that the means, the methods he was using were justified. And now we see the same with the Me Too discussion, the justification of means. And this is really striking, that this is something that is similar to all kinds of violences. So, one thing that I think, like, when we're talking about structures, it's important to understand that when we're talking about these individual cases, and when we're talking about the court decisions, when we're talking about the legislation, and when we're talking about the politics of that are targeted to eliminate violence against women, we see analogical responses. So what I'm saying is, like, for example, these women who went to court, who sought for justice, who sought for redress, and they wanted to just heal and to be free from fear that permeated their lives and restricted their life in many different ways. The responses was like, you know, they were mitigated, they were questioned, they were like in many different ways, they were let down. But when we're looking at the structural level, we see in the society, we see the same kind of response. The whole phenomenon, violence against women, it's often it's questioned. People who talk about it, they are mitigated. They kind of like their right to use these definitions, their right to speak loud, to tell about these issues, to lobby, is questioned. The justification to really speak out loud about violence against women is questioned in many different ways. So this is the analogy to when we compare the individual cases to the society where violence against women is the reality. The responses are, in many ways, they are similar. And that's why the consequences in the society are also in a similar way. They remind the individual experiences. We don't even see in our everyday life how that fear affects us. Women, us, from different backgrounds. But we do have that gender power system which is kind of putting us down, restricting our ability to really participate in the society as an equal. And I think that that's the main thing that we need to change. When we're talking about violence against women, we are really seeking out to be free from violence, to be able to be equal in the society, free from discrimination. And I think that that's the main point when we're talking about structures. We need to change those structures. We need to change the gender power system, the cis heteronormative gender power system, in that way that it enables us to be free from violence in all spheres of life, all walks of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. Well, let's start. There were many things I would like to come back to later. But Christina, hearing this, did it resonate to you, to your experience of making the film? And maybe you could explain a little bit about the film.
Yes, a lot of it resonates, but I'm also a filmmaker, so I have a different perspective in how I work with these things. Yeah, let me just explain to the audience. I have been invited here because I have just finished a documentary film that is this loud enough? Can you hear me? Yeah. I have for 5 years shot a film in a shelter for women and children who've been submitted to violence in Copenhagen, and so I have just, with the camera, I have shot maybe 80% of the film myself, and just following the daily work at the shelter and focusing on the healing processes. So the film consists of a lot of really long dialogue scenes where the women talk to the people working at the shelter, and going through a process where they sort of from having lost their sense of identity is sort of crawling back into their own self. So this is a kind of a slow film, and it's looking at the healing processes, and you're very welcome to come and see it later. And then the film came out in the Danish cinemas in November, and it has also created a political change in the landscape of this theme. I'll tell you about this also. Yeah. But now you know why I'm here. Yeah. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Yes, actually, well, maybe you could tell a bit more about what happened in Denmark after your film.
Yes. Actually, I think that just doing the film, like for the 5 years, I actually never really thought about that it was going out to the public. So I was just doing the film because I was fascinated with the subject matter, and because I grew up in a family myself with a lot of domestic violence. So I have a personal outset for the film. But when we reached the end of the editing process, I sat down with my producer and we discussed what do we actually want the audience to experience when they see this film. And we talked a lot to the organizations in Denmark, the shelter, the organizations for the shelters, all the organizations that's working with violence and women. And a lot of them said that they had a problem making politicians understand the problem of psychological violence. You know that there are 5 different types of violence: physical, sexual, material, economical, and psychological violence. And we're also beginning to talk about digital violence, which is a combination of some of the other types of violence, but in a digital format. But the 5 definitions of violence, the organizations we talked with, said that violence is only being sort of acknowledged if the women could showcase big marks on their bodies or broken legs and arms. And actually only 80% of the people living, the women staying at shelters, have been submitted to physical violence, like 80%, 100%, or in 98% have been submitted to psychological violence. So the psychological violence is actually a bigger problem, and it's also a problem that you cannot see. So we decided, me and my producer, we together with the publicist, we decided to do 2 things surrounding the film premiere. And one thing was to make the Danish population understand what is psychological violence, what is the definition of it, what does it consist of. We want everybody to know that this is what it is. So this is what psychological violence is. And we also wanted to put pressure on the politicians to change the law, because the Danish law system, of course, violence in all its forms is a criminal act, but we can see that there are no cases of people being punished for the psychological violence, and that means that the law doesn't work. So we wanted to initiate the process of criminalizing psychological violence in itself, and so and so we made a strategy, like just a kind of a cynical strategy, and hired a publicist, Line Billenberg, who's a person who has been also working with the politicians as a counselor, like a spin doctor, early on, and she's moved into the film business. And doing strategies for when films come out, what are the conversations that we want the people to have. And she made this extreme work to try to make this change. And should I just say what it was? I can tell you a little bit what it was.
Yes, please.
So you know, when you send out a film, you will send out press kits, and a press kit will be a piece of paper that has a lot of information about the film, about the subject matter. But what we did was we knew that when this press kit will hit all the newspapers, the television stations, the radio stations, these people, they don't have any money anymore to go in depth with this storytelling. So Line did all the pre-research that the journalists don't get paid to do. So she would read all the latest surveys that have been published. She would look at the conventions that the Danish government has committed to, signed. We would sort of boil down all this huge material, also a lot of data concerning the violence against women. We will sort of condense it into a piece of paper that we knew they have time to read. And then we had posed questions that they could use in their programs. And we had also answered the questions in different ways, so that they could sort of begin to see a program or an article in their heads. And we had called up specialists, people from Amnesty International, people from the university, and asked them if they would participate if the journalists call them up to be in a program. So we sort of arranged this whole media thing. And also, of course, because this is a personal story for me, I have written a director's statement telling that the reason why I made this film is that I grew up in a family with a lot of violence, and we never got to a shelter or got any help. And of course, this created also a lot of interest from the press, because as you know, the press are very interested in the personal stories. So a lot of the press was also driven by this personal story. And I think that the thing that sort of made the last push was that because my sister is a famous person in Denmark, she's a famous singer, and she's also been one of the judges at the X Factor show on TV, so she's like quite a famous person. And of course, when the journalists knew that I had grown up in a family, that means she had grown up in the same family. So they wanted very much to talk to her and to us, and we just said no until the end of this process, where our publicist said maybe we could use this as a driving force. So she made an arrangement with the national news on TV, like the 8 o'clock news, and said you can have an exclusive interview, like 5-7 minutes with me and my sister, and we will tell you the personal story, but you have to, in return, put the psychological violence as a theme in 2 days consecutive in the news, and you also have to hunt the Minister of Justice. And they did.
Wow. So, yeah. So, but you really had the psychological violence there, kind of in the center of the material that you sent.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think my film is very much about
Yeah.
psychological violence, but I also think that if you because what is so overwhelming about also hearing you talk is that it's so broad and it's so almost want to go to sleep because it's just almost impossible to make a change because it's everywhere in the society, right? And I think I just needed to have something that I could do in order to create a change. Yeah. So that's
Yeah. So Pia, maybe you could explain a bit about what's going on in Finland with psychological violence, or are we even talking about that? Maybe also if you have some kind of definition for it.
Oh, well, yeah. I would say that yes, there is a discussion about psychological violence, and there is, for example, an initiative from different organizations. We are in collaboration. We published sort of a shadow report to Istanbul Convention, where we demand that psychological violence should be criminalized. And there should be a clear definition about psychological violence, but also about the process. Because as you said, our legislation kind of identifies episodes of violence. Definitely about, for example, physical violence. It's as you said, it's easy to go and seek for justice when you've been hit, because then you can show the bruise. But when you are talking about psychological violence, you are very much talking about the process, not just episodes, not just about one humiliation. You are talking about a constant humiliation. You are talking about, as you said, you are crushing somebody's identity. And what is really a significant when we're talking about psychological violence is you lose the contact to yourself, to your own ability to, for example, make decisions. Because now I'm talking a little bit about the psychological effects of psychological violence, because this is something that there's a vast mass of evidence-based studies about what the consequences are. For example, emotional consequences, that you kind of you are in the stress caused by this trauma, caused by the psychological violence is such that you are not able to be in contact with your feelings, or you are in there's sort of a tolerance window. You are outside the tolerance window with your emotions all the time. So it's because it's a really people experience trauma in different ways. But also something that has not been really discussed that much is the consequences that affect our cognitive abilities, like memory, decision-making abilities, problem-solving abilities. And it's I don't want to sound too gloomy here, because these are consequences, but you can heal from those consequences. That psychological violence, the cognitive effects of psychological violence can be you can overcome those cognitive effects. But yes, you said what's going on, what the definition is. I'm not gonna lay out a legal definition of psychological violence. And actually, I'm interested to hear how it is written in the legislation in Denmark. How that definition, or what kind of definition you were proposing, and because I think, for example, in Finland, one progressive criminalization just lately, it came in force in 2014, is the stalking, the criminalization of stalking, because that's the first time in our history in Finland where the legislation actually recognizes the process and the consequences. The definition of stalking is linked to the consequences, because the fear of stalking limits the ability for a person to live a full life. the life that we are all entitled to. So, and I think, like, you know, when we are pushing for the criminalization of psychological violence, we should also look at the definition of stalking, because it pictures the process. But that's, yeah.
Well, we are this process, the process of defining psychological violence in the law, and also the whole looking into the area of all the people that meets these families and persons who have been exposed to psychological violence. Needs to be done a lot of training also, so that the system meets these people in a way and have a conversation that sort of captures the problem and not ignores the problem, right? But that process is starting now. So the film came out in November, and this discussion is going on right now, and the work with doing the proposition and changing the law will go into the last phase after the summer vacation. So we don't have a definition yet, but I can talk a little bit about it, because I've been traveling a lot also all over Denmark with the film, and people ask me very much this question: what is because of course they sit and think, am I if people are in a bad relationship, is that psychological violence? That's what they ask themselves. So there is a difference between having a relationship with where you can have a bad phase, like you could maybe there has been some cheating or some jealousy. You know, we have all experienced that relationships can have a bad phase, or people know the process when you're getting a divorce, how bad the relationship is up to the point where you decide to have a divorce. And this is not necessarily psychological violence. Having a crisis in a relationship is not psychological violence, and also hitting or talking down to a person is not violence in the sense that we talk about it as a pattern. So the definition that that I was working on with in the film is, and also at the shelters, is that psychological violence is a pattern that goes on over a long period of time. So it's not episodic, it's over a long period of time. It takes place again and again and again and again. Okay, there are different kinds of groups inherited in the concept of psychological violence. So that would be, for example, isolation. So a person who's submitted to psychological violence will, in many cases, start to draw themselves back from friends and family, not going out a lot, going from being very extrovert into sort of being more bound to the home and sort of getting other interests. It can also be surveillance, so that the violent person will survey wherever you go, send 40 text messages when you're out with your friends, asking where are you at this moment and should I pick you up, or just totally over-controlling people's going out with friends. It can also be knowing codes to the Facebook or the email accounts, yeah, and it can also be degrading words, like telling the person that you look ugly in that dress, or I don't.
Definitely gaslighting.
Yeah.
The one.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's also the surveillance can also be that the person follows you. That would be very extreme, but asking the friends, what have you done? You just being too much everywhere. Yeah.
Kind of like slowly taking away the person's power to their own actions or their feeling of freedom or safety and things like that.
Yeah. In my film, there's a scene with a woman talking about how her ex-boyfriend controlled when they should change the furniture arrangement in the apartment. He had control over the economy. He knew about how to pay tax and stuff. And I'm sitting there editing this film. Holy shit! Yeah, at my place, my husband also knows much more about tax systems than I do. So I think that very much in the work with the film, I try to make the subject matter not very exotic, but being something that you recognize from your own relationship. But of course, in the situation of psychological violence, it's just gone crazy bad, right? But it's in the beginning, it doesn't look bad. In the beginning, it looks like some just normal stuff that we all experience. And I think that's also the danger of it, and that's also why this problem don't have any prestige in the media and in society and in the law system. So that's what we wanted to change, yeah.
But that's why we need a revolution, but we also need evolution. Evolution of legislation, evolution of human rights understanding, evolution of understanding autonomy, understanding what psychological violence is.
You mentioned autonomy. That's interesting because there has also been talk about like adding the consent into the legislation, and I think the law passed in Iceland just recently.
Oh yes. In Iceland there has been. Well, maybe we can now say a couple things about that, because
Definitely.
I think, that's something that is a very topical issue in both in Denmark and Finland, and also in Sweden and Norway. So that but definitely Iceland is leading the way in this legislative change, and I think, like, when we are talking about how rape definition should be anchored into the lack of consent, we are also talking about a very major change in legislation, because then we are talking about the legislation that actually identifies the sexual autonomy of a person, of a woman, because it's really there. If this wouldn't be about women, it would be going easier forward. So, but anyway, this is really a big step and necessary step. And this is also about this evolution of understanding what women's rights, what violence against women is, and how legislation should recognize this phenomenon and also protect women from experiencing violence. And this is really interesting because, for example, in Finland, there is a legislative initiative by the network of women in the parliament, but it got like 79 parliamentarians signing of it. So we have 200 in the parliament. So it doesn't. Now it's in the legal council, but it's not sure whether they are going to handle it or not. But anyway, it really I think that proposition is from Hanna Sarkkinen is excellent, and I'm really happy that the network did it, and it's a cross-parliamentarian network, so there are people from all parties and so on. But what worries me about this proposition is that it only puts few words in the definition of rape. What we really need is we need to look at the criteria of consent. We need to really go through, for example, sexual abuse. In the Finnish legislation, at the moment, if you are institutionalized and you are being raped, it's not rape, it's sexual abuse. So if we are going to really introduce consent-based legislation in the chapter 20 in the Finnish Penal Code, we really need to look at also sexual abuse. And we really need to look at the Istanbul Convention. What are, what does, we have ratified that convention, it's in force in Finland and so on, and still we are kind of trying to avoid, this legal changes that we really have to do because we are committed to follow Istanbul Convention. So, but this is really big, and
Could
there
you-
is yes.
Yeah. Could you explain the Istanbul Convention just very shortly?
Okay, it's a convention of Council of Europe. It's a convention of on violence against women and family violence, or was it domestic violence? I can't remember now the exact definition, but it's really revolutionary because it's It identifies violence against women as discrimination of women in the society. It's very broad. It covers all forms of violence against women. It's very inclusive. It identifies different victim groups, vulnerable groups. It identifies all the 5 forms and more of violence, but it also it doesn't just it is like, in a way, it's a human rights convention, but it's also very specific about the criminal code, like, you know, how the legislation, what kind of issues the legislation should address and take into account, and what kind of definitions the legislation should use, and so on. And that's why I'm referring to Istanbul Convention as I'm talking about, as we are talking about psychological violence and consent-based legislation on sexual offenses. But it's really rich, so to speak. It's really rich because there is a lot of things in the Istanbul Convention that we really haven't really explored even yet, what it could mean in the society of Finland and Denmark. But I think, like, you know, these 2 elements are really important to go through, because the other, psychological violence, identifies the process and the, like, you know, the hidden layers of violence against women, which are very common in all forms of violences. And then in the consent-based, when we are talking about consent, it identifies sexual autonomy of women, because at the end, I really think that all violence against women, it's about sexual violence. It's about sexual control. So that could be a great. And we have, in Finland, we have also the Citizens Initiative coming, Suostumus 2018, Consent 2018. It's a citizens initiative that it's coming, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to go through this time. Yes.
Let's hope so. Do you have in Denmark, did you, after Me Too or during these times, have you had a talk about the consent? Or are you familiar if you have the conversation in Denmark?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a Scandinavian discussion.
Yes, definitely.
So what is the question?
Just that, how is the conversation going in Denmark at the moment?
About consent.
Yeah.
About consent.
I actually don't know where it is right now.
Okay.
No, but that's
fine. But actually, we could talk about Me Too a bit. Or did you?
I just want, because you said something. You said that, or maybe I heard you wrong, but or maybe you implemented that making a change is harder because making a change towards less violence against women is harder because we're in a patriarchal system where the power is held by men. Is that what you said?
Yeah, well, I don't think, like, it's not that, well, yes, but I would say that the it's not only when we are talking about patriarchy, yes, but it's the gender power system that is really hierarchical and cis-heteronormative, and that's one of the reasons why issues which have straight link to women's rights are always, they always need a battle. It's like, you know, if we are talking about issues that wouldn't be so clearly gendered, I think it would be easier for example, for the legislation to be changed. But when we are talking about sexual violence, the legislation on sexual offenses, it has always been a feminist issue, even when feminism wasn't a word that was known. Like, you know, it's always been an issue about women.
Yeah. No, but I think that is a barrier to change, and I also experienced that with my film. That I think that the reason why we actually had some success with putting psychological violence on the agenda and also pushing the change of the law is also that we named it psychological violence, because that is, I mean, men can also have been victims of psychological violence. And so I think that's also, I think that there, at least up until October, when the Me Too movement sort of set the agenda that there is a power system in the film industry that is gender biased and also very hierarchical, as you say, that has helped this, that we can talk about this as a gender issue. But I think also actually in working with the film, I was very concerned about this being a storytelling about female victims, right? Because in my family, my father, he was violent towards my mother, and I loved him very much. And he was also a really lovely person. I mean, he was not a psychopath. He had an alcohol abuse, and I also think he had a depression. So I think that the violence was part of a whole system of his internal health that was really bad all around. So it was just a concern when I did the film how not to demonize the man, because first of all, because I'm not interested in that. I don't think that will give us any good. It won't help us change anything, because we also need the men to help us change this, because it's for the greater good for all of us to get rid of violence against women. But of course, it's a balance, because not demonizing the men, and also the violence against women is gender-based violence in intimate relationships and in families. It is more often women who are victims, and the violence that the women suffer from is much more serious than the violence that the men suffer from in violent relationships the other way around. So it is a serious matter. Yeah.
And I definitely, I agree with you 100%, because I think that's the reason why I really want to talk about structures. Because then we are not talking about individuals, we are not demonizing anybody, we are talking about the structures. We are talking about, for example, when we are talking about gender power system, we're all part of it. It's not that men are part of it, it's all of us. It's men, women, non-binary people, all people are part of it. And it's everybody's turn to look at the gender power system and see, like, where am I inside this system? What are the things that I can identify in this structure? And also, then it comes to the, what the responsibility of society is. And that's why I'm talking so much about legislation and politics, because it's not only about individuals, it's about politics, it's about human rights violations.
Also, it seems that it's very hard to talk about structures, or at least that's how it's often put out in the media, that there is this difficult conversation about the structures and we cannot understand it, or the feminists are again talking like about difficult subjects. So how should we talk about structures? Well,
I think that go and see my film, because it's just the structure is showing its power on the face of a young woman. That's where you can see the effect that the structure has. We cannot only talk about the structure as a concept. We have to sort of experience what it does to people. I think and I think that's also why a film. That's why all the big like Hitler, Lenin. They all put a lot of money into filmmaking, propaganda filmmaking. That's because art is a great tool to it's a power tool also, but it's also a tool to create change. And I think that film is a good weapon to make change in society, because you experience something very immediate and with your emotions, and you can recognize yourself in the characters, and then you can think deeper about all the dynamics in society afterwards or while you're watching the film. But yeah.
I actually had one experience about your film. I don't know if it was intentional, but that somehow being so focused on the reactions of the workers there kind of took me more to the structure and not just kind of individual pain, but more on the, well, you said like healing process, but
okay. Let me just explain. My film does not have a main character. Normally, when you see a documentary film, you have a main character and you follow this main character. And from the outset, I was very interested in not having a main character, but having a lot of characters, because to not allow the audience to sort of hook into this person's story, like a case study, that we get to know this person. We have to follow this character through ups and downs, and we will follow her all the way. I mean, this whole narrative dynamic that television is completely obsessed with. I just wanted to put this film in the complete opposite, like film tradition. So this is why that I follow a lot. Maybe I have 5 different characters in the film, and it is because you should not be allowed to sit and feel a lot of stuff about individual characters in the film, but you should see the work that they do, and having a lot of main characters allows you to see what they do instead of using all your energy as an audience to get to know people on the screen. Yeah, so that was the strategy.
okay.
We should talk about Me Too, because you asked the question.
I asked, but then we kind of got into these structures, and it's okay. We can, yeah. So we can talk about Me Too a bit later if you had a comment.
Because I think it was a really interesting question that you asked, like, you know, how should we talk about structures? And I think, like, you know, this is a very good question, because many times the structures are so abstract that we are talking, like, you know, from the distance. But when we are talking about legislation, when we are talking about the training of people who work in the shelter, for example, we are talking about structures. When we are talking about understanding of patterns in a violent relationship, we are talking about structures. Because these, as I said in the beginning, these patterns, for example, they are not, they don't happen in a vacuum. They have a background. Why is it so that this psychological violence that is used in an intimate partner violence is very similar when you're looking at the trafficking of women? You know, there has to be something. So we are talking about, we should be talking about structures, we should be talking about politics, we should be talking about the different elements of politics, legislation, training of judges, training of social workers. We should be talking about human rights education in schools, in kindergartens, in a student and teachers' education. We shouldn't be talking about structures like, you know, that they are somewhere there. But that, like, you know, how is this addressed in human rights education, in Finnish schools, in Danish schools?
And where is the structure, and what is the structure?
And like, you know, what is the approach? What are the materials? Do the materials actually recognize these patterns? Do the materials, do they name gender power system? Like, you know, this is...
I also think a good way to... I totally agree, and I think that that the best way to change the big system is, or the structure, is to ask questions that are very close to people. You know, what is it like to be a neighbor in a compartment building where you think that something bad and wrong is going on the second floor? What is it like to put your child to kindergarten every morning and you see this one child and he's always unhappy and he's always the one who's getting he's always the last one to be fetched by his parents. So all because we all meet these things in our daily life. I mean, I'm sure if we start thinking about it, we have all met this issue, and I think addressing it on the floor level is a good way to as you say, the teachers. You know, lots of teachers, they have like students and they know that there's something wrong over here. This guy needs help. And what to do, you know, helping people to be able to do stuff. I believe very much in that. Yeah.
Also, I will shortly open this if you have questions, but we'll just a bit longer. keep it
But
here.
I just want to comment this because this is something that it's really this is really also revealing or was really revealing to me, because we had in Finland was in the Universal Periodic Review under the Human Rights Council just last year, and one of the recommendations from other UN member states was that we should implement human rights education and like knowledge about gender-based violence in teachers' education, and the state response was something on these lines, like that the universities, they are autonomous, the universities, so you can't like force them to have in teachers' education this element, which is really something. I mean, like, we are talking about a human rights issue here, and the state's response is that, oh, we can't do anything because the universities are autonomous. I'd say, and this is a structural issue. And at the same time, I get calls, I get emails from different kinds of universities where teachers are being, where there are new teachers studying, or how do you say that? Opettajan koulutuslaitos. Anyway, these teachers to become, they contact me asking for help because they don't have tools in their education to really address this issue. And I think, like, this is so revealing that at the same time, the state is avoiding its responsibility by hiding behind the autonomy of universities, and at the same time, the teachers to become are contacting a human rights organization asking for help.
Yeah, so now there actually is a will to learn more about these issues. I was thinking when you mentioned that people kind of need stories or need something to relate to when talking about structures, and then I came back to me too, that is that kind of a story or something we need to actually address an issue?
Sure, and I think also the Me Too movement helped my film a lot, because I think this could easily have been a film that was just like another film on the outside the cinema, but now we're talking legislation, and I think that is also thanks to the Me Too movement. Should I talk a little bit about what this? Well, I think we have had an interesting process in Denmark with the Me Too movement, because it came to us very late. We were this is a Hollywood thing. It has nothing to do with this. Is Harvey Weinstein. We didn't really connect to that until December in Copenhagen, where there was a reading at a big theater, where I think 100 different stories were read by actresses. I'm sure you have had the same thing here in Finland. And I was there, and I was there with some of my colleagues. I just wanted to tell you, besides being a film director, I'm also president of the Danish Film Directors Association, so I do a lot of political work in the film industry. And so my colleagues from the Producers Association, the Actors Association were there, and we were like, fucking shit, this is bad. And so a couple of weeks later, the head of the Producers Association and the head of the Actors Association invited 14 organizations across film and theater to a meeting. And we met all the chairs of the organizations, and I think we were very embarrassed that to hear all these stories, that there was such a bad working environment in our businesses, and we decided to sort of join forces and create 3 different projects that are running right now. Okay. And it has been growing up to 19 organizations now, because we also included the film school, the theater school, so the acting students, and also the more alternative film schools and talent programs.
That's so important. Can you explain a bit more about those things that are going on? And how did you include the film and theater schools? What are they like actually doing?
Right now, they're about just part of being a group that defines itself, working to improve psychological working environment in the film and theater industry, and to minimize sexual harassment and abuse of power. That's the work we do. And first of all, what we did was to. I think that's an important key to making change about at least in our film industries, according to power abuse and sexual harassment. I think it's very important that you sort of that everyone work together. I think otherwise you can just spend hours and hours and won't go anywhere. But now everybody's together in this thing. So the first thing was that we need to get educated, because what we found out was that a lot of us don't even know a lot about the laws, about the working environment. A lot of us are bad leaders. I mean, the film industry is just people. I just want to become a director. I just do this film, and if it's on a festival, suddenly I'm someone. But you have the responsibility of film crews, 50, 60, 70, 100 people sometimes, and you have no education in having this responsibility. So I think a lot of the Me Too readings, at least from Denmark, probably here as well, has to do with bad leadership.
Definitely.
And also crazy ideas about, you probably follow some of the talk about the Centropa case, because this Lars von Trier and Peter Olbæk's company, because Peter Olbæk has this idea that in order to create big art, you have to have a crazy place where you don't have any boundaries, which is not true. It's the marketing. It's a good marketing story, but it's not true about how you create big art
and good art.
And good art, yeah. But we initiated 3 projects. One was to get educated, and we held this big day at the Danish Film Institute in February, where we invited all the people from the film industry and the theater, and we had panels with people from the military, because they have a lot of really cool work being done to avoid sexual. I mean, the military they're really cool in Denmark to talk to, because they have a lot of history with sexual harassment, and they have done a lot of interesting stuff to support their leaders to create an environment where this doesn't happen. So we talked to them. We talked to psychologists and talk about the law, and we so get educated. Just acknowledge that you don't know a lot and get knowledge. Right, that was the first project. Next project is a telephone hotline where you can call if you are if you're in production, because the problem in the film and the theater industry is that you never call your boss, because the boss will just say, "Fuck up, shut up," because we have a big budget and we have to get on time. So you sort of have to have a hierarchy next to the film where you can call, and also this telephone line. You can call if you're a victim. You can also call if you're a bystander. If you've been on a film crew and you saw something, you don't know if is this okay? I feel it's not okay, but I don't know what to do. So you can call and get advice. And it's also for offenders, people who have done sexual harassment. We have, of course, because I'm president of the Danish Film Directors Association, we probably have more offenders in my members group than victims, because we're the leaders. We are the ones who have power. And so, and we also have discussions with some of the members about especially on the big budget TV series where you have American money in. The American companies, after the Me Too movement, are starting to use new contracts where you have to sort of sign that you don't have a history with. And this is like, this also goes for female directors, that you sort of have to sign a contract where you don't have a history, that stuff cannot come up suddenly, that you forgot about, you did, but because then they won't hire you, which is also pretty scary, because I mean, just talking about definition about sexual harassment also. So there's a lot of anxiety in the business. So that was the telephone hotline was project number 2, and then the project number 3 is a code of conduct that we're creating, and I think we're finishing up here in April, and we was invited to the big group was invited to a meeting with the Minister of Culture and Minister of ligestilling. What's that in Finnish? Gender equality, yeah. And we talk to them because actually we also need some more data. We don't know how much sexual harassment we have today in the industries, and we need to ask people, all of them. And I think that we're negotiating with the ministries if they could pay for getting like a survey of that, so we know how big the problem is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that sounds very good and very concrete tools. Okay, now maybe if someone in the audience have questions, we could maybe take one or two before moving on.
Please do, so we don't sit up here alone talking to ourselves.
Wait for the mic.
Sorry for this hand, because it's like, it's impossible to see anybody.
I'm much more trained.
Yes, you don't do this at all.
Okay, so Christina, you talked about bad leadership and that some people just don't know how to lead people or create this environment. For directors that haven't gone to film school, like how do they learn that?
I think they have to study. I think they have to tell themselves, I'm not a trained leader, and I look in all other aspects of society, and people are spending a lot of money and a lot of time taking leadership courses, being interested, reading books, reading articles, sort of putting it on your personal agenda. At least that's what I did, because the film school I went to was not a formalized film school. It was a rebel film school, and we had a little bit of training about that. But I think that you have to sort of put it on the agenda for yourself. And there are lots of good programs, educational programs that you can take and pay for. Yeah. That's the best question. That's the best answer to you.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
I have so these courses, are they just for general environment building in any field, or are there also courses for filmmakers?
I think at the Danish Film School we have a whole educational program for people who have already been educated, and they can come in and they are lots of you could look up at the Danish Film School, because they have educational programs that are in English for Scandinavian people, and you can just apply for money from some of the foundations here and come and do the programs there. I can give you an example from what has really struck me at the reading in Copenhagen there in December. There was one story I also told you about it in the masterclass yesterday. It was a story about it was a reading story about a young actress, an untrained actress who came to the set of a film. I think it was a first-time director film, and it was a short film, and they were doing a sex scene. It was about a couple. And I think that maybe they were around 19 or 20 years old. And in advance in the rehearsal, they had discussed how do we do this sex scene. And then the director had said, you can just keep your clothes on because you will be under the duvet, so we can't see that you are not naked. So you can keep your underwear. And then come to the set, and then the male actor, who's a more trained actor, or more experienced actor, he says, I think we should be naked because I think it will create a better scene. And so the actress, the young unexperienced actress, looks towards the director for help, and the director, because it's his first time and he doesn't have any way of dealing with this, he says, well, if you guys are okay with this, it's okay with me. So this is an example of someone who is not taking on his leadership, who's sort of giving the control back to the actors who it's not their job to have the control, it's the directors. Right, so and I think that this is a kind of a sexual harassment that nobody wanted to happen, but it happened because the person in charge of what's happening didn't take his responsibility serious, right? And there's a lot of that, and I meet it very much because I also teach young talents at the film school and also in other talent programs, and a lot of the first time stories that they want to tell have. It's very much love stories and coming of age stories where you have to be naked. There's something with the body, kissing scenes, sex scenes, and I talk to them a lot about how that you have to create this safe environment as a director and setting up some boundaries for the work in advance, and don't change them when you come to the set, because it will just freak everybody out. And when you're on the set, you don't dare to say something against the director, because you know the whole film elephant is just coming. And also, I think that also just basic knowledge as don't ask actors to improvise sex scenes. Idiotic. Unless you have actors that really go for it, that sort of want to do it, and that's what the deal is. Of course, it's okay. But otherwise, don't improvise things that are like that. I mean, there are ways to do these things that you can learn, and you can It's not that hard. It's craft. It's directing craft. Yeah.
Did you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just because this is definitely not my field, but I was asked to be an advisor to in a situation where an actor, she was really not an actor, but anyway, she took part on filming a series, and on the set she was sexually violated, and it was like, you know, her situation was impossible, and she couldn't really seek for help in that situation, but it was really, really bad. So afterwards she contacted me, and we kind of looked at the situation from a legal perspective. Now my point is that now that this process has been going forward, and there are more legal experts in the situation, involved in the situation, it's evident that the production company has a big responsibility in these situations. That it's not only the director, the production companies should have a very clear-cut guidelines how to go forward and what to do, and what to also demand from the directors in the situation. So it's not like that now we're talking about structures again. Like, you know, it's not only about the director's responsibility, it's the whole production set, and the company. In this particular case, the company is really the one who is like, you know, they are going to be sued if this is going to go into that level. It's not the director or anybody else, it's the company.
I totally agree, and I actually want to extend it and say it's everybody's responsibility. It's also the actors' responsibility. It is. They have a responsibility to say, I work like this, and we should just encourage them to also to say no. I mean, it's allowed to say no to do stuff, and we will work around that. It doesn't mean that if you say no, you won't get the part. Of course, that's what they're afraid of, and that will also happen in many aspects. But we need to create an ethical system in the industry where everybody has a responsibility. Also, the bystander that's looking at the monitor, and I can see I'm just sipping my coffee and getting ready to do the hair, but I can see something. They also have everybody has a responsibility. Yeah. But of course, the formal responsibility is the production company. No,
yes, definitely.
Of course.
And like, you know, in the situation what I was talking about, the person who was violated really was even though she was a star in the scene, but she was in the bottom when it comes to the power hierarchy. So that's when you're saying that the actress should be encouraged to speak out. We really need to have also an understanding about the differences of power and how the power is abused, and how like, you know, that kind of situation can lead to lead to a situation where all the other people are muted, and that they are not really able to say anything, because the situation, the difference of power in the situation is so huge. But that this is like just commenting your whatever you're saying. I totally agree, but it's also like we really need to fresh up or ravistella, shake up.
No, there was also one thing that I thought was interesting in the day that where we met the whole film and theater industry to get educated. There was a psychologist who said that we also have to remember that being a victim and an offender is not a personality. It's not like you are an offender or you are a victim. it is behavior. It is behavior. It's harassing or victimized behavior, and we all do it all the time. I'm sure I have been harassing, maybe not sexually, but I'm sure I have used my power. I'm in the top of the hierarchy because I'm a director, right? I'm sure I must have treated people. Of course, I'm a human being. And I was not trained as a leader. I'm sure there must be someone in my career that felt that I used my power in a bad way, right? So it's just. So I think it's just it's an important aspect, because if we talk about it as, it's also the question that we talked a little bit about yesterday about naming people out in the public, how that creates a lot of fear, and it stops us from making the change together, because we create a polarized discussion. And I think remembering that harassment and being a victim is behavior is a good way of
that's very important point. Or there is like the slight risk of making it just into an individual problem. And that's what I was thinking about when talking about psychological violence or domestic violence or sexual harassment and violence. That is there, like, have we previously been thinking about these as just personal issues or private issues, like we should be taking care of them at home? Sure. Or with like a personal relationship with the director.
Sure. And this is why we see like suddenly one female actress go out and tells a story, and then like hundreds and thousands across the globe follows. I think, of course, it's because, and it's the same thing with violence. It's we believe that it's an issue that we take care of at home. I mean. That's why we never got help in our family, because we were not like low society. We actually had a lot of money. We're growing up, and so everything looked really well, but it was not well.
And there must have been bystanders there.
Of course, well. Yeah. Questions? Yes.
Anja Ritta-Ketokoski, Christine, I saw your film yesterday, and this is of course the big picture of the whole violence in the world. And I was really so much impressed by the way you did it. And I'm missing in the Finnish culture of violence that is of course undeniable, that we have developed a special type of culture of violence thanks to civil war 100 years ago. There was a dissertation recently about what happened in my hometown, which put the whole picture of research on women's, how you make women accept what happens and keep silent. And Me Too environment is of course that it's the same everywhere. It's not only film industry, it's everywhere where you dare to admit it. And in Finland we have the problem that we have no problems. We got the right to vote first, and it's our own fault if we haven't looked into the legislation. And so the first thing would be to admit that we have problems, and that takes a lot of courage. I don't know if many politicians are in this room now to admit the problems, but P was you were referring to what the so-called government said in answer to what can be done about teacher education. I mean, you must be illiterate to write that kind of answer. So political illiteracy means that you deny all the problems. The other people, Danes have problems, Swedes have problems. We don't have any problem. So I think this is... I just wonder, was Idealisten shown in Finland?
I don't think so. It came out on DVD on and streaming.
Because I mean that should create a tremendous debate in Finland, just to show how things are done. And this clear way, you had this nice image of the visit to the ambassador, which is like le charme discret de la bourgeoisie of Buñuel. Talking about...
I like you.
Well, I like you too. So, but I mean, if there are any politicians in the room, they might say something.
I think that it's exactly the same problem in Denmark, that we believe we don't have a problem, and all the Finnish and the Norwegian and the Swedish, they have lots of problems, we don't. But the good news is that it only takes one good person in power to make the change. I actually think that our Minister of Justice, he was really brave to say, he went out and said, before I saw your film, I did not know what psychological violence was. That's a very brave thing for a Minister of Justice to go out and say, I didn't know stuff, now I'm wiser. It's a good thing for the politicians and for people in power to be like that. And he has propelled the change. So I think it's also a question of helping the good people in power to give them tools to create the change. And I'm just saying this because it can feel so overwhelmingly and depressingly big a problem, and almost impossible to just think that will anything change in my lifetime. But I think that we can create change also in a very quick way if the stars are set in the right way and the person is there, and yeah.
I was thinking about the Me Too campaign and film business. I am myself a director and a producer, and as it has been shown that it's the problem is in the working conditions, that people don't take any responsibility of the safety of the workers, and actually that problem has been solved like years ago. We have a very good legislation about working conditions. It's in the law. But the problem is that nobody cares. Actually, we should look at ourselves in the mirror. We are responsible of everything what happens on the set. And it's in the law. We can't always just blame the politicians. We should just read the regulations and follow the law. That's our responsibility. We should look at the mirror also ourselves as producers and directors. We haven't done it because nobody cares.
I agree, and then this is you're talking about the difference between the formal system and the culture that we live in, and we're dealing with a cultural issue here. So we need to change the culture so that we create better in working environments, because of course some of the laws, at least for working in the film business, they work. I mean, they're clear enough, but so it's much more how we execute that law. Actually, what was interesting in that reading in Copenhagen in December also was that because there was a lot of themes that came out of that reading, new themes. So, for example, the concept of a coffee meeting, which is not on the set. So this is a director inviting an actor into a coffee meeting, and this coffee meeting, this was a huge new phenomenon to me. This could go on in the summer house. It could be a brunch. It could be like a drink starting at 11 o'clock in a bar. Coffee meeting, like talking about actually a job conversation, right? So and also at the theater schools where the actors and actresses were trained, there was a lot of Me Too readings from the schools also that was news to me. So it's not that everything is going on the set. I mean, it's going on also in hidden areas that we need to get more knowledge about. Where is it happening, right? Yeah.
I actually have a question about when you were talking about how important it is to realize that it's kind of a way of behavior or a conduct, like a victim conduct or abusive kind of way of behaving, and maybe it's a bit easier to tackle that issue in like a specific industry. But then when we talk about like society as a whole, who should be talking, or who should we be talking to if we want to tackle the abusive behavior, for instance?
I think first of all, this was also something we discussed in the masterclass. A couple of you guys were at yesterday. I think that that we need to distinguish between the debate and the action. First of all, I think that a lot of people think that when you're debating a lot and you're talking to journalists or you're on social media, you are part of creating a change. You're not. You're not creating change. Debating is not creating anything. Right now, hopefully it will create some income to some of the newspapers because they are good at doing clickbait interviews. But I think that the good thing that happened in Denmark was that we actually sort of silently committed to not debating anymore and say we leave the discussion, we leave all the questions from the journalists, we leave a lot of social media wars with words and getting into working mode.
That's
right?
so good, because I feel that like the debate, it wears you out and then you don't have any energy left for actual.
Yeah, I think don't underestimate the draining of the debate. I mean, it doesn't really do good. So if you want to change, stop debating. Yeah, do stuff. Yeah.
with my experiences just justify my voice in this discussion? No. We all should be talking, and we shouldn't be forced to kind of reveal more than we really are comfortable with. And we should be, when we are talking, it's not who should be talking, it's who should be, who do we address, and like this wearing out, the debate that is wearing out. This is exactly what I'm saying. That's why I'm working in a human rights organization that is actually doing campaigning, because it's really, I've been working on this issue for nearly 30 years now. I was one of the formers of Rape Crisis Center years and years ago, and like, you know, it's been part of my life. But I'm sure that I would be really a different person if I wouldn't have the opportunity to really do and act, campaign, to be active in the society. And I'm not asking anybody, do I have the permission to talk? I'm just here and talk aloud everywhere I go. And it's like, you know, this is something that we should be doing, and we should be encouraging each other to do, to really just take the space wherever you are, on set, behind the scenes, in court, in politics, everywhere.
Yeah.
I actually have a lot of confidence in humanity, because I believe most of the people that I met touring with this film, I mean, this is just normal people, just people like just everybody, and I experienced that a lot of them, all of them have a desire to make a change, right? So it's not that the problem is that people don't want to make the change, like normal people. So I think the concept to maybe look into is to how to create empowerment in people. How do we give people advice and tools and courage to start acting in the space where they are themselves, because there's lots to be done just around yourself. You don't have to be a film director or prominent organization that you are. I mean, there's lots to be done just in your relationships to your family or friends and working environment. And I believe very much in empowering people in all these little places. Yeah.
Actually, I really like the dramaturgy of this conversation now, going towards the end and moving to some kind of maybe concrete tools. Do you have, because I'm sure that there are lots of people here, or at least one, who is all the time thinking that what can I do? So what can a single person do? What can an artist do? What are some ways to affect change?
I think that one very radical thing to say here is like what one person can do is to take care of herself, to really look at herself as a valuable person, a valuable human being, and see, like, you know, this is my life, and I need to really take care of myself. And also another radical thing is to allow to be empathetic, because empathy is really a radical moment, a radical feeling, a radical approach. And then when it comes to concrete, ei kuulu vai?
Lähemmäs suuta vaan.
Okei, kuuluuko nyt?
Mä tuon sulle uuden.
Okay. I've been talking too much. So you can't hear anything I say?
You want mine?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well, take care of yourself. Allow yourself to be empathetic. Empathy is a radical notion. And then when it comes to concrete issues, I think, like, for example, join the Citizens Initiative for Consent 2018. Sign petitions. We are meeting with the Minister of Family Affairs and Family and Social Affairs in the 20th of April, and we are handing out 2 petitions where we demand her, the Minister Annika Saarikko, to really put resources and work for more resources and better structures to really combat violence against women. So sign those petitions. There is like lots of things that you can do. Join the feminist movement. There are openings everywhere.
I agree. And if you know someone that's in a violent relationship, or you maybe think that something is wrong, I would just say, I don't know if I'm wrong, but are you sure that you're okay in that? It doesn't look that good, but maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but let me know if you're not well in your relationship, and I can help you. There's lots of hotlines you can call and stuff. Yeah, and also just one good advice from me is to stop the friendly fire. So this is a concept that I learned from the women's movement in the 70s. The friendly fire means that in the women's movement, a lot of little groups of women started debating amongst each other, and having different perspectives on how this should progress. And I would stop that. I would not start debating with my fellow people. I would look at the goal and accept that people have different ways of doing stuff and different tempos and different personalities and different interests. But as long as you're heading towards the same goal, it doesn't matter. I mean, you don't. We don't fall to pieces for being different, right? No, yeah. No. Well, we've become a better place. Yeah.
Okay, I think our time is up. So thank you so much.
Yes.
And thank you, everyone. Hopefully see you at 1 o'clock here. Thank you.
And thank you, Pauliina.
Tosiaan kello 1 meillä on eri panelistit täällä ja tervetuloa silloin takaisin.